Oh, you're making me, making me, making me, making me, making me, making me, making me give in. Oh, baby, I can feel the rush of adrenaline. I'm not scared to jump if you want to. Let's just fall in love for the hell of it. Baby, just keep falling. I can feel the rush of adrenaline. I'm not scared to jump 'cause I want you. Let's just fall in love for the hell of it. Baby, we just keep falling.
What's up, guys? It's the Anime Titan here, and today we'll be jumping back in with What If Deku Had an Evil Shadow Dragon Quirk. This would be part 3. I might be doing 3 uploads today, not sure. I'll check how much I can handle at a time, but because I wasn't able to post on Tuesday, I actually will try to get at least a double upload. I apologize for not getting it out to you guys, but I did have school after all, so yeah, you can't really blame me for that. So let's jump right back into it. Last time we left off with Rei, Natsuo, and Fuyumi. They were all just surprised that Toya was alive. They were hurt that he was now working with the villains, but they were actually still happy that their brother was alive. Well, Fuyumi and Natsuo were happy that their brother was alive. Rei was just glad that she didn't lose her son, Toya. So I'm just gonna have it be that Natsuo would immediately jump up out of his chair and yell out to Fuyumi, "Toya's alive, did you hear?" Fuyumi would nod her head, but she would be a little hesitant. She would then look at Natsuo, who seemed overexcited and just hyperactive. Natsuo would then look at Fuyumi and ask, "What's the matter? What's wrong? Is there a problem?" Fuyumi would then reply with, "Didn't you hear? He's been spotted with that Izuku guy. You know, the one that can hurt All Might? Toya's a villain now." Natsuo would shake his head, saying that, "No, you're wrong. Toya would never do that." Fuyumi would then just, remind Natsuo that he did try to attack their mother. Natsuo would then come up in Toya's defense, saying, "Yeah, well, it was all Dad's fault. Well, Endeavor's fault. He pushed Toya to the limit. He's the one who filled Toya's head with false dreams and hopes. He's the reason Toya's over there now. You see, that's why I hate him. That's why I hate him most of all." Rei would look over at Natsuo, just a little shocked. Even though she's seen that Natsuo really doesn't like his father, she's never heard him say he hates him. Natsuo would storm off, and Fuyumi would try to chase after him, but Rei would tell her that he just needs space. He needs time to cool off. Natsuo would then immediately as he was leaving the hospital, he'd stomp off and would find himself heading in the direction of the construction site that they said Toya was spotted at. He would go there and would find shelter under a beam as it started raining now. He would stay there for the next 2 days, just sitting there. Fuyumi was worried, seeing as she hasn't heard from Natsuo in a while. Rei was also worried because Natsuo hadn't come to visit. But Natsuo would still be sitting there, and this is when, out of nowhere, Izuku would appear in front of Natsuo and ask him, "What are you doing here?" Natsuo would look up at Izuku and ask, "Where's my brother? Where's Toya?" Izuku would look down at Natsuo and say, "Well, you see, Toya's back. Well, Toya's a little busy at the moment." Natsuo would get onto his knees and beg Izuku, "Please, just let me see him one more time. I have to say sorry." Izuku would look at the now crying Natsuo and would grab his hand, would lift him up off of the ground. He would put his hand on Natsuo's shoulder and immediately teleport in front of Dabi, who was manning the forge at the what do you call it? What was it again? Factory. There we go. Would be manning the forge at the factory. Toya would be a little surprised that Natsuo was there, but he wouldn't be so surprised that Izuku popped in out of nowhere. Toya would look at Natsuo and say, "Hey, what's wrong?" As he had seen Natsuo's tears. Natsuo would immediately run up to Toya and hug him, apologizing, saying that he's sorry he couldn't help him. He's sorry that it was so weak. He's sorry that he couldn't stop Dad from doing all that. Toya would just look at him a little angered now because he said Dad. Sorry, Natsuo doesn't use Dad, he uses Endeavor as well, so sorry that he couldn't stop Endeavor from treating Toya that way. Toya would just look at Natsuo a little bit more angry, but he would understand. Natsuo would let go of Toya and he'd actually look around, seeing that there were a few other villains, but they were doing honest day's work. They were actually working. They weren't just committing crimes. Natsuo would then come to realize, then ask Izuku, what are all these villains doing working here? Shouldn't they just be stealing or something? Izuku would have a little vein appear on his forehead, and he'd lash out at Natsuo, yelling, "You think that's all we do? We just steal because we want to?" Figures, son of a hero wouldn't understand. As Izuku would storm off, Toga would see Izuku's visible anger, seeing as there was now a dark, shadowy aura just emanating off of him. She'd immediately walk over to Izuku with Eri, seeing as Eri is in the care of Toga 24/7. Toga doesn't take her eyes off Eri, and she makes sure Eri's always safe and nearby. Toga would walk up to Izuku with Eri right behind her, holding her hand, and she would ask, "What's wrong?" Izuku would look at her, and immediately his face would change, seeing as it's both Toga and Eri. "Nothing," he'd reply, giving a soft smile at the two. Toga would know something's wrong, and that Izuku didn't want to talk about it, at least not in front of Eri. So she'd nod her head and whisper in his ear, "We'll talk about this later." Izuku he'd try to shrug it off, but Toga was damn persistent about it, and she would get to the bottom of this. So we go back to Natsuo and Toya, as Natsuo would look at Toya saying, "Did I do something wrong?" Toya would look at Natsuo just a little bit angry as well, saying that most of these villains, they come from harsh upbringings. People constantly telling them that they have villainous quirks, that they will be bad guys inevitably. There were people that were treated badly and just shunned by everybody. Look at Izuku, for example. Toya would then go into Izuku's backstory, being that Izuku was a normal, regular citizen wanting to become a hero when his childhood friend and now cause of his villainy would have kept nagging him to show him his quirk. Izuku would have gotten riled up and annoyed at Bakugo, and his quirk would have spiraled out of control, seeing as he can't control the dragon aspect of it, because he had both a shadow and a dragon aspect to his quirk. And this would have caused everybody to look at him in the light of a villain. Natsuo would have been a little shocked at this, but so he could have still changed it. But that's when Toya would have said that he really couldn't have. His mother abandoned him directly after that and dropped him off at an orphanage. The orphanage, the grown-ups at the orphanage would have beaten Izuku daily, calling him a villain. Izuku would have done his best to steer clear from them, but he would inevitably still gotten beat. This is when Natsuo would realize that Izuku wasn't actually a bad guy. He was just made out to be. He was groomed to be a bad guy. Toya would then look at Natsuo, seeing that Natsuo finally realized why Izuku's actually like this. Natsuo would be kind of pissed, and he would hate heroes even more. He would hate the society that they live in. He would ask them how they could help, and Toya just said the best thing he could do right now is stay out of this. This would have thrown Natsuo back a bit, just realizing that Toya doesn't want to be interrupted in what he's doing, and that he actually has almost like a family here. Seeing that Izuku's like older brother, even though he's younger, he's there protecting them, making sure all of them are fine. He's the glue that binds all of these villains, the one that's basically like their caretaker. Seeing as he knows what it feels like to be shunned, destroyed, and hurt, he's making sure that these guys are constantly safe. Natsuo would nod at what Toya said, but then would quickly ask, "Can I at least have your number so that we can keep in contact?" Toya would nod as he gave Natsuo his number. Natsuo would then quickly walk up the stairs towards Izuku and would apologize, saying that I didn't know that's how you were brought up. Izuku would realize that Toya probably most likely told him what happened, and Izuku would nod, just saying, "Okay then." Natsuo would then ask if Izuku could take him back to the construction site, which Izuku would inevitably do. Natsuo would then leave and would go back to his apartment. Seeing as Natsuo is still studying to become a doctor here, Natsuo would arrive back at his apartment and go inside and just end up flopping onto his bed, out cold. We go back to Izuku and the rest of them. So Izuku would now just be sitting in the office, looking at some minor paperwork. This being the taxes. Well, not taxes. What should I make the paperwork? It's just paperwork. Screw it. I don't have time to think. Well, I do have time, but I just don't want to. So Izuku would be looking down at it when all of a sudden he'd hear a knock at the door. This being Toga. Izuku would wonder where Eri is, and he'd ask, "Where's Eri?" Toga would reply with, "She's asleep," and Izuku would nod. Toga would walk in, closing the door behind her. Izuku would be a little confused, but he'd continue with his paperwork. Toga would sit down in front of Izuku, across on the other side of the table, and immediately ask him, "What's wrong?" Izuku would look at her confused and ask, "What do you mean?" Toga would then say, "I was the first one you saved. I've been with you more than any of these other idiots. If anything, I know when something's wrong. Spill it." Izuku would then inevitably tell Toya that what Natsuo said earlier today just ticked him off, thinking that all villains just do this because they want to, because they would actually prefer stealing instead of having an honest life job, and that the world treated us all fairly. Toga would see Izuku's rage visibly bubbling up again, seeing as the dragon tattoo on Izuku would have moved down to his arm, and the eye would have started glowing red now. This is an indication that the dragon would be siphoning off of Izuku's anger and increasing their strength exponentially. But that would also mean that Izuku would be out of commission if he uses his quirk right here and now. Toga would then grab Izuku's hand, thus snapping Izuku back, surprising the crap out of him. Seeing that Toga grabbed his hand, he'd look at her and he'd visibly see that she actually really does care about him. He'd then get up as he'd give Toga a hug. This surprising Toga, he would whisper into her ear, "Thank you." Would whisper "thank you" into Toga's ear. So then Izuku would just go off back to the construction site, seeing that the construction is actually still continuing. So news had spread that Toya Todoroki is still alive and that he is working with what do you call it? The shadows. So which also means that Shoto would have found out about Toya. He would would have heard the name Todoroki and would be confused. Is he one of Endeavor's bastard children? One of the ones not from his mother? This is when he'd ask Fuyumi, who is this bastard son of Endeavor called Toya Todoroki? Fuyumi would immediately just slap Shoto, saying, "How dare you speak about our eldest brother like that?" Shoto would be a little surprised, saying, "Our eldest brother, what do you mean? I thought it was Natsuo." This is when Fuyumi would shake her head, saying, "No, it's actually Toya Todoroki. He was the first son of Endeavor. He had a fire quirk. It was called cremation. Blue flames, but his body couldn't handle it. His body was built for an ice quirk, so he would inevitably end up damaging himself using his fire quirk." Shoto would quite literally just be shocked hearing that Toya had such distraught. Fuyumi would then also go on to tell Shoto that before him, Toya was supposed to be the hero, the number one that was going to take All Might's spot. But eventually he came and Toya was pushed out of the light. And that visibly angered Toya, seeing that his father could replace him so easily. Shoto would realize that he drove Toya out. Not on purpose, but he's the cause of Toya being driven out. As Fuyumi would also go on to explain that Toya really loved their father and that he wanted to be the best for his father, for Endeavor. And Shoto would be surprised seeing that Toya actually went through the exact same training as him, sometimes even training his physical body even further, and here he was moping around, saying, yeah, I'm not going to use my fire quirk." This would be just a massive shock to Shoto's system, seeing that he originally wasn't the perfect weapon, it was Toya. Toya would somewhere sneeze. Well, Toya in the factory would sneeze and would think, someone's probably talking about me. So we'll cut back over to Izuku. Izuku had now left the office and would be heading to his room. This is when he'd actually enter his room, seeing a sleeping Eri. Izuku would dare not bother or make any noise, so he'd just close back the door and leave. This is, however, when Izuku would decide he's actually pretty decently had enough of the hideout for the time being. So he would leave and head out to a coffee shop. The coffee shop still being open, just barely though. He would enter and immediately just order a cup of coffee before the waitress actually saw his face. She would take his order and then go in and bring him back the cup of coffee, realizing actually who it was. She'd quickly run off and tell the manager. The manager would come barging out, saying, "Oh, we do not serve villains here. Get out." Izuku would look at the manager and say, "Who said I'm a villain?" The manager would be a little shocked at this, saying, "You attacked All Might, you attacked the UA students." Izuku would just look at him, saying, "I had a score to settle. I didn't kill anybody, did I?" The manager would be surprised, but he would still yell out, "Yeah, you're still a villain no matter what. You attacked heroes." Izuku would say it's self-defense, he attacked first. The store manager would actually think about it for more than 10 seconds and would then look at Izuku, saying, if he really was a villain, he would have come in here and robbed us. If he really was a villain, he could have shut him up immediately, killing him right there on the spot. He would then look at Izuku, seeing that there was no murderous intent or danger coming from him. This is when the manager would mutter out, "I apologize." Izuku would be a little surprised at this, but he would quickly reply, "It's fine, I understand." The manager would say, for the commotion I have caused, this one's on the house." Izuku would then say thank you and would finish his coffee before leaving. Izuku would exit, and he would just be walking when out of nowhere. This is when Kachan or Bakugo would turn the corner. He'd see Izuku and he'd immediately try to run up to him. He'd yell out, "Izuku!" This would kinda irritate Izuku hearing that voice, as he would look at Bakugo and see him. He would stop, turn around, and ask Bakugo, "What the hell do you want?" Bakugo would immediately, as soon as Izuku turned around, just run up, stop in front of him and fall down to his knees, head pressed against the ground, saying, "I'm sorry. It's all my fault. I shouldn't have done that all those years ago." Izuku would look at Bakugo and then just tell him, "It's too late now." This would shock Bakugo, seeing as Izuku would constantly be a forgiving person. He'd always have forgiven anybody, even if they didn't ask for it. At least that's what he had done throughout their entire childhood. Bakugo would then immediately just grab onto Izuku's leg before he would go, and he would say, "I truly am sorry, Izuku. I didn't mean it. I shouldn't have pressed you so hard." Izuku would shake his leg loose and just continue walking. He would continue walking and then just fade into the shadows, this being him actually teleporting away. When he got back, he immediately, when he reappeared in the factory, he immediately went outside and just punched a tree. The tree actually physically shaking as a bunch of apples would fall out. One of them actually hitting Izuku on the head. Note, this did not knock the man out, because I'm not going to have Izuku be a pushover. It's not going to be some king. You knock him on the head, he's KO'd. Because remember, King has no physical power. At least not until he grows his full wings. His actual fairy wings. So Izuku would pick up one of the apples and bite into it. This apple actually being really sweet. Izuku would have sat down underneath the tree, thinking to himself, "Bakugo, it's all because of them that I'm a villain. They're the main cause of this." As then his mind would flash back to the sports festival. It would be coming up in about another half a week, seeing as in this timeline, UA actually decided they would build the dorms first and just extend the sports festival by a little bit. So they would actually be building the dorms first and then doing the sports festival, instead of where they just have the sports festival then the dorm system. Because I'm gonna be honest, I don't know how the hell they got that dorm system set up so damn quick. Just like, bruh, how do you get a dorm system set up in 2 weeks? I know they got Cementos, which makes building things easier. But again, it's just like, what the fudge, man? You completely just nuts. So anyway, this sports festival would be coming up next week. There would be another 3 days, seeing as it's now Thursday. Izuku would walk in and he would call all the villains together. He would lay out a plan, a blueprint of the UA Sports Festival arena. The villains would pay close attention to what Izuku was saying. Izuku would then go on to explain that, okay, so we know that they will have 3 events. We don't know what though. So we'll have to wait for the right time to intervene. I suggest near the end, on the third and final, the final thing, the final challenge. That's when is the best time to intervene, seeing as we'll catch more people off guard, and a bunch of people would actually be tired by then. There will be a bunch of heroes guarding this place, but I'm pretty sure we can take most of them on if we have to. If anything goes wrong, regroup back to me and we'll get out of there immediately. The villains would nod and Izuku would tell them, "Start getting your gear ready now. I want to leave bright and early the day of the sports festival." The villains would nod as they would quickly scatter, going off and gathering their gear. They would all go to bed that night and would wake up the next morning. Izuku would say, I'm going out, as Toga would want to join him, but she has to wait for Eri, seeing as that is her duty after all to babysit little Eri. Izuku would have gone out and would be walking through the city. This is again when Bakugo would appear. This time, actually, having followed, well, spotted Izuku earlier, just leaving. Well, I'm just gonna have it be like this. Izuku went to the coffee shop again. Bakugo, figuring Izuku might return there, had waited there that morning. He would also have contacted Inko this time, telling her that he's seen Izuku. Izuku's here now. Inko would quickly get in a car and drive there, and she would see Bakugo just following Izuku. Well, following some unknown person. Izuku would stop and yell out, "What do you want, Bakugo? I'm not coming back. I'm telling you this now, and I'm not forgiving you either." Bakugo said, "I'm fine with you not forgiving me, but please do come back, Izuku. It's not like you. You wanted to be a hero." That's and he Bakugo was about to continue when out of nowhere Izuku cut him off. "Yeah, wanted. Key word in that sentence. I no longer do. I see that heroes now just rely on power, and one wrong move could end your entire career. Entire career." Inko was close enough to hear this, and she just felt a massive it just felt if something had punched her in her heart. Well, somebody had punched her in her heart. Izuku would then turn around, saying, "It's because of you and my stupid mother that I'm like this. If she had actually taken the time to help me or to think about what had happened, I wouldn't have been in this situation. But no, she acted on her so-called motherly instinct and decided to give me up for adoption, where they brutally beat me every single day, just by calling me a villain. When I finally became old enough, I left. Now I work with the villains, the people that were treated exactly like me, shunned because of their quirks, hated because of what they did, even if they had no control of it. I was still 4. I couldn't control my quirk at all. You have explosions. It's a terrorist quirk, and yet you're in UA. What happens if you decided to shoot an explosion at me? Everybody would be, "Oh, it's such a great quirk. Don't worry, Bakugo." Everybody would just they wouldn't second guess it. They just think of it, "Oh, it was an accident." But when it was actually an accident with me, what happened? Everybody blamed it on me, saying I did it on purpose. So what the hell do you think, Bakugo? You think that's fair? I don't. Inko would immediately just run around the corner, because that's where she was, around the corner. She was listening to the entire conversation. Inko would run out and immediately tell Izuku that she's sorry. Izuku would look at her in disgust and say, "Yeah, I'm sorry too, for being your child at least." He would then turn around and start walking away. This is when Inko would run up and actually hug him. Izuku would be shocked at this, but he would shake loose and would immediately he would shake her off and would continue walking. He'd say, "If only you'd cared about me like this before." And then he would walk off, again disappearing into the shadows. This time he would appear in the shopping mall. A bunch of people would have recognized him and would have actually started taking photos and calling heroes. Well, not heroes, but the police. Izuku would have walked into one particular shop, this shop being a knife shop. He would have bought 3 different knives, one of them being almost like a machete, the second one a dagger, and the fourth one just a close range combat knife. The owner would be trembling in fear as Izuku would be selecting these knives, seeing as he would probably try to chop. The owner would be thinking he'd probably be trying to chop me to pieces with these weapons. Izuku would drop at least 200 rand cash, well, 200 yen cash, saying, "I hope that covers it," as he would then walk out with the knives. Keep in mind that this was actually more than, he actually paid more than what the knives cost. The shop owner didn't think twice and took the cash, because he was afraid. Izuku would have put the knives in a bag. Well, not a bag, but he would have held them in one hand. This is when pro heroes would arrive. Izuku would just not care for these, so he'd call out Akuma. Akuma would have arrived and just started swatting villains left and, well, not villains, heroes, left and right. He wouldn't be injuring them to the point of death. He would just be knocking them around, knocking them out as well. And Izuku would tell Akuma that's enough as he reached the door. Akuma would immediately just turn into shadows and then reappear on Izuku's body. Izuku disappearing into the shadows and reappearing back at the hideout. So, guys, it looks like I'm at the 3-minute timer, so I think I'll be cutting it off here. I hope you did enjoy. Personally, this was more of a filler episode arc, in my personal opinion. I didn't really like the way I was hitting with that, but in the next episode, I definitely will be hitting up one of the arcs, so you guys don't have to worry about that. This will be the Anime Titan signing off. Peace.